Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. As God's chosen people, the members of the nation of Judah were to have turned to Him for help in times of need. But they had made a habit out of seeking and serving false gods, not only for worship, but for rescue. And in Isaiah chapter 36, verses 1 through 21, God's going to indict them for their misplaced trust. Over the centuries, Judah had regularly placed their hope and trust in false gods and turned to foreign nations for assistance when facing difficulties. And most recently, they had turned to Egypt, forming an alliance with their former captors and paying them a large financial settlement in order to guarantee their help against the Assyrians. But none of this had been God's will. He had never instructed them to pay their money or place their hope in the Egyptians. And even Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, knew that this costly arrangement between Judah and the Egyptians would prove to be a waste of money, because Egypt would prove to be an unreliable savior. Pharaoh had been quick to take Judah's money, but would be slow to offer any form of aid in return. And the people of Judah were going to learn a very painful lesson about misplaced trust and their missing faith in God. The fateful day has arrived. The Assyrians are literally knocking at the door of Jerusalem, preparing to add this city to a long list of others they had conquered in the region. Isaiah provides us with a date, the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign, which would have been 701 BC. By this date, the Assyrians had conquered 46 cities in Judah, including Lachish, which Sennacherib used as a staging area for further military actions. The Assyrian king sent an emissary, accompanied by a massive army, to discuss surrender terms with King Hezekiah of Judah. This display of might was meant to persuade the king to surrender Jerusalem without a fight. King Hezekiah sent 3 of his top administrative personnel to meet with the Assyrians, and as they stood just outside the conduit of the upper pool, the people of Judah squeezed onto the walls to see what was going to happen. It's interesting to note that 23 years earlier, on this very same spot, Isaiah had been sent by God to confront another king of Judah, facing a similar problem. And the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub, your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field, and say to him, Be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these 2 smoldering stumps of firebrands, at the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Remaliah." Isaiah 7, verses 3 through 4. Nearly a quarter century earlier, Judah was facing the combined forces of Syria and Israel, 2 nations who had formed an alliance in order to capture Jerusalem and destroy Judah. But God had other plans. He warned King Ahaz to stay strong and not lose heart. As bad as things may have appeared, the outcome would be different than expected. He told them, "It shall not stand, and it shall not come to pass." Isaiah 7, verse 7. But he also warned them, "If you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all." Isaiah 7, verse 9. The Syrians and the Israelites never conquered Jerusalem. Their plans were easily thwarted by God, and He used the Assyrians to accomplish His will. Now, 23 years later, the Assyrians were gathered in mass outside the walls of Jerusalem, and the words that Isaiah had spoken to King Ahaz all those years earlier still applied. The people of Judah had no reason to fear if they would only trust in God. And trust is the main theme of King Sennacherib's ultimatum delivered by his emissary. This is what the great king of Assyria says, "What are you trusting in that makes you so confident?" Isaiah 36, verse 4. Remember, the king of Judah had paid a large sum to the Egyptians to secure their assistance in the event that the Assyrians came against them. Their confidence, if any, was in that very expensive alliance. They had placed their hopes in the military might of the Egyptian army, but they were nowhere to be found, and King Sennacherib knew it. "Who are you counting on that you have rebelled against me? On Egypt? If you lean on Egypt, it will be like a reed that splinters beneath your weight and pierces your hand. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is completely unreliable." Isaiah 36, verses 5 through 6. Sennacherib knew that Egypt would prove to be an unreliable and even dangerous source of security. They could not be depended upon. But the Assyrian king's strongest words of warning concerning Judah's misplaced trust were aimed at Yahweh. But perhaps you will say to me, "We are trusting in the Lord our God." But isn't he the one who was insulted by Hezekiah? Didn't Hezekiah tear down his shrines and altars and make everyone in Judah and Jerusalem worship only at the altar here in Jerusalem? Isaiah 36, verse 7. Actually, Sennacherib had his facts wrong. When Hezekiah had begun his reign as king over Judah, he was only 25 years old. But he proved to be a very different kind of king, ruling much more in line with his ancestor King David. He did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestor David had done. He removed the pagan shrines, smashed the sacred pillars, and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke up the bronze serpent that Moses had made, because the people of Israel had been offering sacrifices to it. The bronze serpent was called Nehushtan. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before or after his time. 2 Kings 1, verses 3 through 5. King Sennacherib saw Hezekiah's removal of the pagan shrines as an affront to Judah's God. Being a polytheist, he didn't understand the concept of a single deity who demanded the undivided worship of his people. But it may be likely that Sennacherib was addressing the unspoken fears of the people of Judah, who were wondering if Hezekiah's reforms had actually angered the false gods they used to worship. Had his radical efforts to rid the realm of all gods but Yahweh been the cause of all their problems? The Assyrian king seems to stir the embers of this smoldering spirit of unrest among the people. And the three royal representatives of King Hezekiah, sensing that Sennacherib's words were having their intended impact, asked that the rest of the negotiations be conducted in Aramaic rather than Hebrew, so the people on the walls might not understand what was being said. But the Assyrian emissary refused, choosing instead to address the citizens of Judah directly. Then the chief of staff stood and shouted in Hebrew to the people on the wall, "Listen to this message from the great king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Don't let Hezekiah deceive you. He will never be able to rescue you. Don't let him fool you into trusting in the Lord by saying, 'The Lord will surely rescue us.' This city will never fall into the hands of the Assyrian king." Isaiah 36, 13 through 15. Again, the primary emphasis of this message was focused on trust. He warned them not to trust Hezekiah, the Egyptians, or their own God. They couldn't rely on their king, their allies, or their deity. Sennacherib was removing every single source of support and security. In the place of their unreliable resources, King Sennacherib offered peace and security. "Make peace with me. Open the gates and come out. Then each of you can continue eating from your own grapevine and fig tree and drinking from your own well." Isaiah 36, verse 16. "I will arrange to take you to another land like this one, a land of grain and new wine, bread and vineyards." Isaiah 36, verse 17. Notice what he's doing. He's offering the people of Judah what God had promised to give them. In a sense, he was setting himself up as their God, their source of peace, prosperity, sustenance, and security. And that's what the enemy always does. He appeals to our innate need for divine help, but he sets himself up as the solution to all our needs. It should not escape our notice that Sennacherib and the Assyrians were a threat to the security of Judah. They had proven themselves to be the enemy of the people of God, having already destroyed 46 other cities of Judah. And now they were camped outside the walls of Jerusalem, a massive army prepared to add this city to their long list of conquests, and determined to make its citizens its slaves. The offers of Sennacherib were well-disguised lies. He told the people of Judah what they wanted to hear, offering them escape through surrender and rescue through compromise. If only they would trust him, they would live. But God would have the people of Judah trust him alone. No matter how bad things may have appeared, no matter how attractive the enemy's lies may have sounded, only God could deliver the salvation for which they longed. Listening to the lies of the enemy would result in slavery, not salvation. Trusting in the promises of Satan always brings death, not life. So God calls out to us to remain faithful to him, to place our trust in him alone. If you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all. Isaiah 7, verse 9.